Hi and welcome to another edition of ChinnyVision. If I was to say Hadouken, you'd know what I was talking about. Yes, it's Street Fighter 2, and we look at the SNES version here, but actually what we're going to be reviewing is the Spectrum version. But really, to look at the Spectrum version, we've got to look at the SNES version first. For many, Street Fighter 2 is the game to have, certainly if you had rich parents at Christmas 1992 with your SNES. I think it cost about £70 to buy, so it really was a rich kid's purchase back then. It wasn't a game I was into at the time. I had friends who had it. I was quite frankly happy with my brand new Amiga that Christmas. But it is a superb fighting game. Just looking at this here, fantastic sound, fantastic graphics, so many different moves. I'm not a good Street Fighter 2 player, but it is such a great, iconic game. Has moves that certainly we all copied at school. I remember a friend of mine shouting Hadouken, doing a flying kick and kicking a door off one of the lockers. I think he intended to close it, but he accidentally kicked it the wrong way and kicked it off its hinges. That took some explaining. Of course, Street Fighter 2 was a candidate to be ported to every single system under the sun. Amiga, ST, also Sega Mega Drive, PC Engine I believe, and the Sinclair Spectrum and Commodore 64. The Amstrad version never came out. It was talked about for a long time in Amstrad Action, with US Gold promising it next month, pretty much every month, and then they said it was an administrative error and had never been made. Not sure how true that was. Perhaps they'd started development and given up. I'm not so sure. But the Spectrum version certainly did come out. This is my Spectrum Plus 2, and this is the screen on my Div MMC Enjoy SD card adapter, and you can see how big the tap file is for this game. It's nearly half a meg on a Spectrum. This game came on a C60 cassette. A C60. It is the biggest Spectrum game ever commercially released, and there's a screen there that tells you this game may differ due to machine limitations. Well, we'll see that in a minute. Nice music here on the menu screen, lots of different options. You can redefine player 1 and player 2. You can turn the backgrounds off, and this does reduce the amount of multi-load time required, because with this game it needs to load in each character you select, or the character you select and the computer-defined enemy, and the backgrounds as well. Music keeps on slowing down here on the menu screen. I'm not sure why. Well, it certainly feels like it's slowing down. So if we were playing this on a real Spectrum, I've just had to load in the stage here, and here we go. The graphics are certainly big, and there's loads of movement and incredibly detailed backgrounds. However, they are 2-colour. There's no music, there are sound effects. If you want to shout Hadouken at any stage, feel free. But it is a little bit limited. You've only got one fire button, obviously, on the Spectrum. The manual isn't very helpful. What it says is it gives you all the moves you could have, but then it says your machine may differ. So it's incredibly difficult to work out what moves are missing on the Spectrum version, because there are certainly some moves missing, but which ones they are incredibly hard to work out. If Street Fighter 2 was a game where you end up mashing the buttons in order to defeat the enemy, then on the Spectrum it's just a case of pulling in a direction, mashing the fire button and hoping something happens. After playing the SNES version, this version feels incredibly laggy, but it also works the other way, because if you play this version for about half an hour and go back to the SNES version, as I have done, the SNES version suddenly becomes impossible to play, because it's suddenly a whirlwind of colours and movement and completely overwhelms you, because you can't... You spend 5 minutes getting your head back around how to play it, because you've got used to the slowness of the Spectrum version. That's not to say this is a bad game. It's far from it. It is Street Fighter 2 on a Spectrum. The graphics are incredibly detailed. A lot of the Street Fighter 2 moves are there, and once your eyes adjust to the screen, it becomes quite fun. The enemies are quite easy to overcome, I have to say. I've defeated that enemy there, and now I'm on to the next level, which is going to be E-Honda. And different colour scheme here again. Each level has a different colour scheme. You can, and I'll show this later on, adjust the colour scheme, the foreground and background colours on each level. That said, the default colour scheme nearly always is the best one. And really, you have to look at the size of the sprites here on the Spectrum, because these sprites are really big. And E-Honda's leaping around there. I don't think I've seen many games on the Spectrum, if any, that have such large sprites moving around. And once you become used to the slight lag and the speed the game goes at, it really does feel like Street Fighter 2. I'm not going to show all the levels, I'm going to skip on now. So it's Blanca now. And rather, got a green colour scheme for Blanca, I guess. And I have to say, it's not much challenge in this so far. All the enemies have been fairly easy to defeat. You can play this in 2-player mode. Works quite well. In fact, it possibly works better. The problem is, every time you finish a bout, you need to go back to the menu screen and reload everything in again. This game, as I say, came on a C60. It is the biggest multi-load, certainly commercially released, on the Spectrum. It's the most frustrating multi-load. There's no disc version. So if you're going to play this, I suggest playing this via an SD card on a Div MMC Enjoy or something like that, or perhaps playing it on an emulator. Buying a copy of this on eBay is just going to be a dead loss. You are just going to spend your life loading. And as I say, this is a C60 cassette. It's incredibly frustrating unless you snapshot it to something else once you've got it. The other thing is, this game was rushed out onto budget. It was released at the end of the Spectrum's commercial life. I believe it was on budget within about 3 months. And it came out on Kicks and was rush released. And I've spoken to somebody who worked at a software shop at that time, and he told me that he ended up with a load of Street Fighter 2 remaindered Spectrum games because Kicks just shoved it out before the Spectrum was commercially dead. And that was around August, September 1993. So this came out earlier in the year, something like March 93, April 93, and it was on budget by the autumn. That may also give you an indication of how rare a full price version on the Spectrum of this may be, because I suspect not many were sold. There was an article in your Sinclair that said at this time the Spectrum was selling at 2,000 to 3,000 for a chart-topping game. So there's probably not many copies of this out there. So I've lost against Guile there. And for the first time in the game, you, unlike the other versions where you get a little message at the end of either winning or losing, when you lose in the Spectrum, you do get this large sprite up and you get a message. You can continue at least with some credits if you want to, so you don't have to go back and reload. So that's something at least. I'm just showing the colour changing here. You cycle through the various colours, background and foreground. As I say, some of them are pretty ugly. I'd personally leave it on the default settings because they seem to be worked out pretty well. So, Street Fighter 2 on the Spectrum. It's not a bad game. Okay, it's certainly not like the SNES version. It's certainly not like the Amiga version or some of the other versions. But for the Spectrum, it's a really good stab at it. As long as your expectations are set accordingly, and as long as you allow yourself to adjust to the pace of the gameplay. As I say, if you come straight from the SNES version, it feels turgid, slow and laggy. But once you get into it, actually, it's not bad at all. It's a really good technical achievement. You are going to have to play this from an image. The cassette version is a dead loss. You're just going to spend your life rewinding and fast forwarding tapes, and of course you've got a +2. There's no tape counter, so you're going to end up rewinding it to the start of the tape. It's just going to be a complete nightmare. So by all means, buy a copy to put it on your shelf. I suspect the full price version is relatively rare, but if you want to keep your sanity, my advice is play it off an image, because otherwise you're going to spend your life waiting around and fast forwarding and rewinding tapes.